Hello there, Year 5. I'm going to do some reading with you today, looking at our books that we've been reading, the George's Secret Key to the Universe. Now, I realise it's been a while since we've actually done any reading of that story, since we were last at school. So the first thing might be to just give you a little bit of a recap to help you remember what happened in the couple of chapters previous to what I'm going to read today. And so we had the part where George and Annie had been in trouble for using Cosmos the computer without Eric's permission. And then we'd had the bit where Ringo and the gang of bullies had thrown the custard pie at George's dad on his protest march. And then when they'd been running off doing other Halloween pranks, they ended up at Dr. Reaper's house. And he'd got them to do a job for them. And he was taking this really keen interest in Eric and what was going on. And George had managed to lie to him about what was happening. But there seemed to be some sort of plan going on for Dr. Reaper. And then also George was going to enter into the school science competition, but his piece of rock that he'd managed to take when they'd visited Saturn, he'd had to put it in the bin to get rid of his head teacher, and when he went back, it had just, the bin had been emptied, and he didn't have anything to do his project on now. So that's where we'd got to in the story. We'll pick up today and go from there. So, chapter 20. It was pouring with rain when George walked home that afternoon. Cold splats of water hurtled down from the dark grey sky as he trudged along. Cars dived for the big puddles at the edge of the road, sending tidal waves of dirty water swooshing over the pavement. By the time George reached his own street, he was shivering with cold. He got as far as Eric's door, and he hovered anxiously on the doorstep. He was longing to ring the bell and ask the scientist to help him with his talk for the next day. And he also wanted to find out why Dr. Reaper might think that he'd disappeared. But he was worried that Eric would still be cross with him and send him away. To ring or not to ring? What to do? Well, the skies were getting darker and darker, and suddenly he heard a huge clap of thunder. The rain got even heavier, and George made up his mind. It was important to ask Eric about the talk and tell him about Dr. Reaper. He decided to be brave and ring the bell. Ding dong! He waited for a few seconds, and nothing happened. Just as he was wondering whether to ring again, the door flew open and Eric's head popped out. George, he said in delight, it's you, come in. And he reached out a long arm and he whisked George inside, shutting the front door with a brisk slam. Now, to his great surprise, George found himself standing in Eric's hallway, his wet coat dripping onto the bare floorboards. I'm so sorry, he stammered. What for? Said Eric, looking a bit startled. What have you done? Well, about Annie and the comet and Cosmos, George reminded him. Oh, that, said Eric. I'd forgotten all about it. But now that you mention it, don't worry. Annie told me it was her idea, not yours, and that she made you go into outer space. I take it that's true. He looked at George over his heavy glasses, his bright eyes twinkling. Well, yeah, it is actually, said George with relief. So really, continued Eric, I should be saying sorry to you for jumping to the wrong conclusion. Instead of considering all the evidence, I just applied some common sense, otherwise known as prejudice, and came up with totally the wrong answer. Now, George didn't really understand all of this, so he just nodded. But from the library he could hear the sound of voices. Are you having a party? He asked. Well, yeah, it's a sort of party, said Eric. It's a party of scientists, so we like to call it a conference. Why don't you come in and listen? You might be interested. We're talking about Mars. Annie's had to miss it, I'm afraid, as she's still at her granny's. But you can tell about it if you stay. Oh, yeah, please, said George, forgetting in his excitement to talk about his school project or tell Eric about Dr. Reaper. And as he took off his wet coat and he followed Eric into the library, he could hear a woman's voice. This is the reason why my colleagues and I strongly advocate a thorough search of our closest neighbour. Who knows, in the end, what we may find by digging underneath the red surface. Now, Eric and George tiptoed into the library. It looked quite different from the last time George had seen it. All the books were neatly arranged in shelves. Pictures of the universe hung on the walls in frames, and in the corner lay a pile of carefully folded spacesuits. In the middle of the room, on rows of chairs, sat a group of scientists who were all different shapes and sizes, and looked as though they came from all over the world. Eric showed George to a seat. A finger pressed to his lips to show George it should keep very quiet. Standing at the front of the room was the speaker, a tall, beautiful woman with a plait of thick red hair so long it reached right down past her waist. Her green eyes glittered as she smiled at the scientists gathered for the conference, and just above her head, Cosmos's window portal was showing a red planet. The red-haired speaker continued her talk. Isn't it highly probable that evidence of life, had life existed on Mars in long gone times, is not there for us to find on the surface? We should never forget that every now and then, sandstorms radically alter the planet's surface, burying deeper and deeper beneath layers of inorganic dust the entire past of our red neighbour. As she spoke, they all saw through Cosmos's window an enormous sandstorm that took over the whole surface of the red planet. Eric bent his head towards George and he whispered, "What she means is that even if there was once life on Mars, we couldn't see it on the surface today. In fact, I can tell you, this scientist strongly believes there was life on Mars at some stage. She sometimes even declares that there still is life there. That would be one of the most amazing discoveries of all time, but we can't say much more than that at this stage. We need to get onto this beautiful red planet to find out for ourselves." Now George was about to ask why Mars was red, but he realised that the speaker was finishing her talk. Do you have any questions before we have a short break?" she asked the audience. "After tea and biscuits, we'll discuss our last and most important issue." Now, George felt very sad that he'd only heard the end of the talk, so he raised his hand to ask something. But meanwhile, all the scientists were murmuring, "Oh, tea," and none of them wanted to ask a question. "So, let's have our well-deserved tea break then," said Eric, who hadn't spotted George's raised hand. The scientists rushed over to the tea table in the corner of the room. They were anxious to nab all the jammy dodgers before the others could scoff them. But the red-haired speaker had noticed George's thin arm, waving in the air. "Well, well," she said, looking at George. "Colleagues, we do have a question after all, and it's from our new fellow down there." The other scientists turned, and they looked at George. When they saw how small he was, they all smiled, and they brought their cups of tea and biscuits back to their seats. "What would you like to know?" asked the speaker. Please, if you don't mind," said George, suddenly feeling very, very shy. He wondered if his question was a really stupid one and whether everyone would laugh at him. So he took a deep breath. "Why is Mars red?" he asked. "Oh, good question," said one of the other scientists, blowing on his cup of tea, and George breathed a huge sigh of relief. Professor Kershak, the red-haired speaker, whose name no one ever managed to pronounce, nodded, and she started to give George an answer. "If you walk through the hills and mountains here on Earth, you can sometimes see patches of ground that are not covered with any plants, and these patches are red. This is true, for instance, in the Grand Canyon in the United States. But there are many other places where this is also the case, and the ground is this red colour because there is iron that has started to rust. When iron becomes oxidised, which is another way of saying that it's rusted, it becomes red. It is because of the presence of oxidised iron, rusted iron, that the surface of Mars is red." "So, do you mean that Mars is made of iron?" asked George. "Well, not quite. Since we sent some robots to Mars, we know that it is just a thin layer of rusted iron powder that gives Mars its red colour. It seems that underneath the layer of red dust, the surface of Mars may be quite similar to the surface of the Earth, without the water, that is." "So there's no water on Mars?" "Oh, there is, but the water we know of is not liquid. On Mars it's far too hot during the day. Any water turns into vapour and is lost, so the only places where water can remain are those where the temperatures always remain cold, day and night, so that water can freeze and remain frozen. This happens at the poles. At the North Pole of Mars, we have found large quantities of frozen water. Ice. It is the same on Earth, where large ice reservoirs can be found at the poles in the Arctic and the Antarctic. Does that answer your question?" "Oh, yes, thank you," said George, and he was just busy thinking up another question when Eric stood up at the front of the room, next to the speaker. Thank you, Professor Kershak," he said, "for your very interesting paper on Mars." And Professor Kershak bowed, and then she went to take her seat. "Now, dear friends and colleagues," continued Eric, Before we move on to the last and most important issue we have to discuss today, let me thank you all for making the effort to get here. Some of you have come from far across the globe, but I know that the talks we've heard today have made the journey worthwhile. I'm sure I need hardly remind you how important it is that the existence of Cosmos stays a closely guarded secret, and the group nodded in agreement. Now, continued Eric, the question we all came to answer is a question of fundamental interest for everyone who's involved in science. We all know far too well how it can be used for evil purposes, and that is why we have all taken the oath of the scientists, so that science is used only for the good of humanity. But we are now facing a dilemma. As you heard in the news, and you saw at the Eco March on Saturday, more and more people are concerned about the state of the Earth. So the question we now have to answer is, should we concentrate on finding ways to improve life on Earth and face its problems, or should we try and find another place for humanity to inhabit? All the scientists in the room were silent, and they looked very serious. George watched them as they wrote an answer on a little piece of paper. Eric then collected the papers into a hat, and in total, including Eric and the red-haired speaker, 8 scientists had voted. Eric then started to open up the papers, one by one. The Earth. Earth. Another planet. Another planet. Another planet. Earth. Earth. And another planet. Well, said Eric. It seems that we have a split vote. Now the red-haired Professor Kershak put her hand up. May I make a suggestion? She asked. Everyone else nodded, so she got to her feet. George, she said, addressing the boy directly, we may lack a bit of perspective on this matter, because we are all scientists in our field, and specialists too. So, you could maybe tell us what you think about it? Well, all the scientists were looking at him now. George felt very shy, and he stayed silent for a few seconds. Say what you really think, whispered Professor Kershak, twisting his fingers in his lap. George thought about his parents and the Green Campaigners. He then thought about the excitement of travelling in space, trying to find another home out there. And then he heard himself say to the scientists, well, why can't you do both? And that's the end of chapter 20. So, now that you've listened to the chapter, I've got a couple of questions which will come up on the screen in a moment that I want you to think about to help with that. So, first of all, George goes to Eric for help with his project. Do you think Eric will help him now? And what do you think George's project might end up being about? Question 2. Why do you think the scientists asked George for his opinion? And do you think this was a surprising thing that they actually asked his opinion when he was there? And why, if so? And then finally, your third question. Why do you think that the authors made you wait so long to find out if Eric would forgive George after what happened? I've counted it up and it's been nearly 5 chapters and about 46 pages before you got an answer to that. We've been thinking about that whilst the other things have been going on in the story. So why do you think they made you wait that long? Okay, so just 3 questions to have a go at. Hope you've enjoyed the chapter. Hope you can answer the questions, and then we'll go on to the next one next week. But until then, it's goodbye. Okay, see you later.